Cool. Something to be done. So now we need to take a look at polish. And polish is really about resolving form. So we saw that the trim brush came from planar brush, which we're going to look at in more detail here in a bit. Polish comes from the flatten brush. So the flatten brush plus very specific depth masking plus, in this case, continuous orientate, because it's like rubbing the surface of our model, surface of, say, a wood carving with sandpaper. You're just continuously adapting to the surface. No backtrack. None whatsoever. But polish introduces a couple of other new features for us as well. One of them is tablet pressure. All the brushes have this. If we go to ZBrush, you can see it in the brush palette. Tablet pressure. If use global settings is on, then it's going to take its cue from the preference tablet setting. If that is off, then it's going to allow you to create a individual setting for each brush. So you can see that the trim dynamic works with size at a very specific curve to it. Z intensity looks linear, brush mod looks specific, and brush embed does. What this is essentially doing is saying off to the left there's 0 tablet pressure, off to the right there's 100% tablet pressure. And then up and down is the intensity that the brush will affect. So at 0% pressure, or I should say 1% pressure, just very minimal pressure, the brush size is actually still quite large. And then at 100%, we've got 100%. Whereas the intensity, 0 means 0, 50 means 50, 100 means 100. So we've, in terms of size, we've remapped 0 to be about 50 and on from there. Which just really means that our brush stroke is going to be on the largish side no matter what we do to it. So that's one of the factors. You can kind of see it in effect here. But the next feature that it really brings to our attention is the preserve edge feature. So we're going to take a look at the hard polish brush. So I'm going to press B and then just H. It's the only brush with H, so that's the only one that came up. If we dock it, you can see there's specific sizes. So no matter what, polish is always one size. Never varies. Oops, bad Ryan. Z intensity is actually quite low. So this is one way to modulate Z intensity. Even at 100%, it's not going to be full intensity. So that's going to really shorten the range of effect. Give us if the algorithm was just too intense to begin with, this just gives us this a greater range on the lower end of the scale. RGB intensity, not really relevant for this, but brush mod, notice how it's favoring the left, so it's going to be more of an influence than anything else. Alright, so now what does this do? I'll show you the diagram, and I can also show you just what it does. As I brush across the surface, remember samples, preserve edge, as I brush across an edge, it's going to do its best to keep that edge intact. Notice how I've just slowly broken that down. If I set preserve edge to 1, as soon as I go over that, it just starts to destroy it. If I set preserve edge to 100, then it's going to take a lot to get that to blend in. A lot. So setting this to 30 is going to give me the ability to work the surface of the model fairly carelessly and not sweat accidentally destroying the surface. And that's really one of the key advantages that it has in terms of giving us control. Okay, there we go. Pull that out, pull that. And just really clean up as much of this as I can. So part of this is just not having the polygon count that I want. But let's see how we can affect that change here. I'm going to soften that edge. Polish and adjust. And keep working that surface. So if we see that in an illustration, preserve edge of 1 means that it's just going to ignore the edge. It's just going to treat it like a normal surface and it'll just bowl right over it. Preserve edge of 30, going to try to keep that edge. Preserve edge of, say, 90, and it's going to keep even more of that edge. So polish is going to be kind of key for us to get in there to really refine surfaces. But we really need planar brush to help us get in there and be even more articulate about what we're creating. So let's take a brief look at what the planar brush offers us. So first thing we know is that it has its own unique algorithm. It's largely going to be without depth embed, although cutting into it works as well. Orientation, but primarily backtrack. That is the feature that makes the most difference with planar brush. So here's our algorithm, taking everything within the sphere of influence and conforming it to the virtual plane that it creates. So let's take a look at that in the works. So I'm going to go B for brushes, P for planar, and I like to try planar flatten, which is actually a variant of the flatten brush more than anything else. But the good thing about it is that it's once orientate, and it's going to allow us to create a very strong specific plane. It also, if you have multiple strokes, it allows you to really get in and sketch things. So if you have straps or a little bit more organic feel that you're going for, it's not a bad brush for you to try it. So as I started doing that, some new form ideas came to me. So it's worthwhile always taking advantage of those. So I switched to trim front, so I can just cut in a hole here. Switching to move, pulling out. Okay, and back to planar and flat. Okay. Just adjusting that surface back and forth. Sometimes the strangeness that happens gives me these new forms to play with. We can also be very specific by switching from plane to line. So in that case, there's no messing around. And then we can switch to just planar itself. And in this case, let's make sure our depth is not too low. It's at 0. Okay. Let's turn symmetry off. Okay. And work the surface. Okay. Now let's see what kind of damage we can do up here. Looks like we might need more with the trim brush. Cutting some planes. Okay, switching over to trim dynamic. Switching over to clay. Switching back to trim dynamic. Okay, let's go trim front to just create some louvers in there. Makes it look like a baboon nose. Not sure that's quite appropriate. No, useful, maybe not. Back into planar to really clean and create specific plane. Let's take a look at some of the other planar options as well. So planar cut is going to have a little bit of embed depth, which is going to really allow me to cut into the surface to create these strong planes. Strong planes defined by the surface normal I click. So use with caution. You can also press Alt. And it's good to just get yourself experimenting with it. Okay, now switch back to hard polish. We're going to take this form that we developed here and just soften that. Just very lightly touching the surface of this model. Okay, on we go from there. Okay, just a little softening up of it. So lots of things that we can do using trim, polish, and planar. And let me load a few more that you'd see. Now these are all just blocked in and sketched, but they give you a bit of an indicator of how you can develop form and sketch around. So the only way that you're going to really learn this is by getting in and experimenting. So remember, bring the trim dynamic brush into play first, then switch to polish, then to planar, then back to polish, and play with that back and forth. Try not to introduce too many new brushes, but Trim Adaptive does have a lot of power to helping you create forms that you maybe weren't aware of before. So good luck with that, and I hope you enjoyed.